She wasn't thinking, and he wasn't thinking, neither one of them were thinking about the consequences of their actions for the other person. Maybe they were thinking about it and just didn't care. And I think all of this really boils down to, do you want to do what's right or not? Or do you want to do what's wrong? If you want to do what's wrong, there's nothing anybody else is going to do about it. You're going to do what's wrong. Mm-hmm. But if you do want to do the right thing, then there are steps you can take.
Every last thing that she just continues to say in that stretch of verses is like, there's no thought at all, except when she's like straight out saying, my husband's not home. But there's really no thought about like, my marriage is important to me. There's no indication at all that she sees her marriage in the way that I believe that we're supposed to, hold our marriage in the way that we're supposed to honor the marriage and one another. And so there's a lack of real commitment or understanding of what that's really about. Mm-hmm. And maybe because she's a foreigner, maybe she doesn't really understand it. And maybe she's gone along with the whole thing on the surface, but doesn't really have a real regard or understanding at a deep level. And so she's just like, really doesn't matter. And we see that today. We see that today a lot in a culture that is not accepting of God's design for relationships between men and women. And I can be married, but it's really only as long as it's convenient for me. So it's, mm-hmm. I think we see whether the consequences were different then in that culture, or there aren't as many consequences in the culture that we live in terms of, possible death. There's a lot of death that goes on around, marriages that are broken, all kids that are, damaged by that, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. It goes on and on.
Yeah, it's just there's more distance between the lightning and the thunderclap. So people aren't making the connection.
Yeah.
Or if they do, it's only with their therapist 20 years later.
But the other Bible story that comes to mind is Joseph with Pharaoh's wife. Potiphar's wife. Yeah. And how, there seems like there's some similarities between her trying to seduce him and and the woman in Proverbs trying to seduce the man, just, pulling out all the stops, but yet, ultimately Joseph was not looking for that hookup. He was not looking for that encounter, and his heart was prepared to be able to stand against the temptation and even just run from it. At great price to himself as well. So
yeah, there's interesting contrast there. The story of Joseph and Tamar Judah and Tamar, and then Joseph and Potiphar's wife are put in parallel in Genesis, so you can contrast the behavior of the two men. But I hadn't really thought about contrasting the behavior of the two women. They're both trying to seduce somebody, but their motivations are both very different, and their perceptions are very different. Potiphar's wife, very much like this woman in Proverbs 7, waited until her husband was away on a business trip or on some kind of trip. He was away from home. But she didn't know her target. She wasn't paying any attention to Joseph. She didn't know anything about him. If she did, she would have known that he was not a vulnerable target, and she would have gone after somebody else. Tamar, on the other hand, she didn't have a husband at the time. She was waiting for a husband. And he was not out looking for trouble. He was out looking for resolution of trouble. But she knew her target. She understood who Judah was. She understood his habits, where he went, what he wanted when he went there. And she set him up. And so that, he's like the bird in this proverb. He flew into her trap and didn't even know there was a trap there until it was already too late.